Welcome to Let Me Know How It Is, a podcast about all things geek. No one can seem to turn their head these days without seeing a superhero on something. They're all over pop culture right now, but for how much longer? That's the question on our minds as we discuss the sustainability of superheroes. I hope you'll enjoy, and if so, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Every week it seems like there's a headline of some famous filmmaker predicting the end of the superhero. So as superhero fans, I think this is a wonderful time we're living in, but it can't go on forever, right? Or can it? Who really knows? What do you guys think? Is the superhero sustainable? I'm Zach Slater.
I'm Frank Melman.
I'm Tommy Smithereens.
I'm Clifton.
All right, before we get into it, maybe we should explain what we mean by is the superhero sustainable?
I brought this to you and I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about the idea of the sustainability of the superhero, because every time, like you said, you can't turn your head, you can't turn around with there being somebody's like, well, surely this is the time that Marvel's going to screw up this movie and we'll never get another superhero movie as well made, or we won't get any more superhero movies. Or the idea that the genre itself is going to peter out. And I guess movies are where I was mostly thinking about, but I also think about the fact that, superhero as a concept has been around since the 30s. You're talking, what are we in Superman's 80th anniversary, or right around there?
Are we over 80 now?
I guess we're over 80. Yeah,
I think he's 82 now.
Yeah, 82.
So that just got me thinking the idea that, every once in a while you hear this. It's kind of like with the kind of thing of like the idea that something like that's been around that long can't possibly go on. It was a little bit of that, as well as a little bit of the fact that when you had that thing from Scorsese saying, well, the Marvel movies aren't cinema, when we all know that they are, because cinema really is, just a story told with moving pictures. That's basically what cinema is. So that was what got me thinking about the idea of, can we possibly go on? Because more and more I see, like, say, with stuff with Image or Dark Horse or those companies, when you look at the stuff that isn't licensed material, all the stuff from creators really isn't superhero stuff. Like all of your non-Marvel or DC stuff tends to be less and less about quote-unquote superheroes. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say generally these days it seems to be like every time I see a new Image book out there, it tends to be some kind of mashup of other genres, and they seem to be going against superheroes because I don't know. I mean, I remember an interview with Ed Brubaker on a Nerdist Writers panel where he was talking about working for like the big two, and he's like, well, if you really want to write superheroes, there's no reason to do it anywhere else. Do it there. He's like, oh, for one reason, they're not going to sell as well anywhere else.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's become kind of like a Coke and Pepsi situation. I feel like with Marvel and DC being like the product. It's going to be, if you want superheroes, it's one of those two, and you'll get your occasional like RC Cola or Jolt or whatever, but that's only ever going to be like a niche thing and never is going to quite breach the market.
I mean, they're out there, but there's not many. I mean, there is like the Spawns and Hellboys and stuff like that and everything, but a lot of that has dropped off, I feel like. I mean, Spawn doesn't, to me at least, have quite the power that he had.
No, like in the 90s. In the 90s, you had some outsiders that were kind of breaking in. Malibu had some hits. Valiant at the time, though they're back now, sort of, I think.
Yeah, they're starting to.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always been a few outliers around.
But I'll attest that to marketability. I mean, just the symbols that they've created for those particular heroes have sustained over decades. It's not like all the newer ones or the 90s versions never had the ability to market themselves quite as long as those ones. I mean, we're not no one's buying Hostess snack cakes with them advertising it like it was before.
Sure.
I mean, I think the distinction for me is a lot of those books tend to be creator owned, and so you get in some way like a singular voice. And I think the beauty of at least Marvel and DC is that multiple writers have touched Batman, multiple writers have touched Spider-Man and everything, and everybody's left their mark. And I think that's why the characters are so sustainable. And I think that maybe that's why Spawn quite has not been, and things like Wildcats has not been. That, yeah, like I know that there have been like other writers that have touched it here and there, especially like at the launch, but nobody's getting signed on to do like, we're doing a run of Wildcats, right? Like Grant Morrison's not getting signed on to do like Wildcats for a year.
Well, they did.
They tried, and it only made it to issue 1.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it didn't make it.
But they did have plans to do it for more.
But
Yeah,
I mean, but you get what I'm saying, though, right? Like, no
Sure.
hotshot writer is like Bendis is not doing a Cyberforce.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
every now and then, Wildstorm. Like, I think the last big launch for a lot of those books, like from that, say, the Wildstorm universe, they had was what I think Warren Ellis was the one that was supposed to be behind a bunch of them. I could
Yeah,
be
he
wrong.
did stuff on them, like
Yeah.
Authority and stuff.
Yeah, like he was the one that was going to come in and basically do like, I don't know if it was the first issue or the first arc, or like write the Bibles for the stories or whatever. But I mean, I think that it's one of those things where I agree with you. There's not really a push to do the idea of, somebody from that's big in superhero, the world of superheroes, to basically go out of that and write for someone else other than the big two. So basically what I see a lot of times when I don't really look at previews anymore, but when I see there's a new book coming out from someone who is primarily known for writing superheroes, like you said, Zach, it's a situation where they're writing up like a mashup of something. They're mashing up two genres together, and it's got some, whether it's a supernatural element or some kind of sci-fi element where people may have powers or abilities, but no one's pulling off a shirt and there's a symbol underneath, and that's the symbol that you're going to recognize, and they're going to be a superhero, right? All the tropes aren't really there.
Right.
I was trying to, when I was thinking about the thoughts for this episode, I was trying to think of like, what was the last real traditional superhero outside of the big two that I could think of, and I kept coming back to Invincible.
Yeah, I knew
Right.
you were going to say Invincible, because I agree completely. Also, I can't think of another one.
Like granted, Kirkman was really huge at the time Walking Dead pretty much took off from like issue 2. I think it was pretty big. The idea that it was going to be an ongoing, instead of a zombie, movie or whatever, or something that basically was over in 2 hours. You're going to have this ongoing narrative about living through a zombie apocalypse. He also is doing Invincible, and I feel like Invincible doesn't really get its due as being one of those books that's outside of the big two, because I think it would fit in there well, because it is an archetype for basically Superman's kid, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely like one of the more successful creative attempts at kind of doing like a superhero thing outside of the big two.
Sure.
You're right, because it does feel the spirit's the same, right? Like a lot of times superheroes outside of those two companies can feel kind of like cheap. Mm-hmm. Is the word I'll say,
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it falls in a couple categories, where you may have a situation where you're using a lot of archetypes, and Kirkman does this at first. He's got archetypes for the Justice League, for Omni-Man, and for like the rest of the group, right? Like for Invincible, Invincible's dad is basically
just like analogous versions of those characters,
absolutely. Right. And then he sort of fleshes out with his own characters that he just, perpetuates his universe, and before you know it, there's all this shorthand for all these characters that surely have adventures. We may not see them, but they definitely feel like real characters, all within the same Invincible universe that he's created, right? It all makes sense. It all has, they all have their own agency and purpose and all that stuff. And I never, after a while, I didn't really think, well, this is going to be an analogy or an archetype for another character. These characters were unto themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, but going back to what you said earlier, I'm just trying to think of the variant ones but to me, I guess it boils down to what corporate sponsorship, as opposed to what Zach was saying, what the creator owned. Because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, Hellboy, and I'll say even Witchblade. Witchblade had an opportunity to grow past it when they had the TV series, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the biggest one is one we're not accepting is Turtles. Look at Turtles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
100%.
Yeah. Turtles to me is probably the biggest non-Marvel, non-DC comic that has spawned into its own thing, and that refuses to die. I mean, it's finally getting the chance to be seen through different creators or different sponsorship. But to me, the corporate push behind Turtles will be probably the strongest representation of a superhero, not traditional cape like we seen earlier, or even with Marvel and DC. that will push well beyond our years, I think.
Yeah, but I think there's something to be said about Turtles. Also, the fact that, like you said, like many people have gotten to work on them.
Right.
So, I mean, for pretty early, too. I mean, we can even say that. I mean, Turtles comes out 84, 87. We get the cartoon, and that's a completely different version with different voices attached to it. Yeah, I think that there's something to be said about having one person kind of control what the character is going to be, and you can get a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and you can get a seminal run like Invincible. But I mean, do you think that anybody's ever going to touch Invincible that's not Kirkman?
Well, no, I mean, they're not going to now, especially because of the fact that it's over. Like it ran it. I mean, Kirkman wrapped it up. He told the story. Now he's done. So I don't think there's going to be, I mean, it's creator-owned stuff, so it's not one of those things where someone's going to come along and redo it without him saying, okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that's my point. I just don't know how many of the creator-owned characters is the creator willing to kind of go like, yeah, take a stab at this and go ahead and play with the character a little bit and see where it goes, and I'm going to give you the freedom to do that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like Mignola, like other people write Hellboy, but Mignola like has his fingers like very much into what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like he's still very much in control of his thing as he should be. I mean that's part of the appeal, but
I'm more worried about if there's the extreme case. Like Zach, you mentioned that the creator kind of stifles the growth of the property, but then there's cases in which when the creator inadvertently is sold to a bigger corporation. Like, look at what happened with Milestone Valiant characters. And I usually say it's the big ones to me is Captain Marvel / Shazam. I would love to see how big that character could have gotten if DC never bought the rights to it.
Right.
You know?
We should say Nickelodeon owns the Turtles now.
Yeah.
Very true. Very, very true. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's an interesting dichotomy between like, because on one hand, I think it does help sustain the superhero because you're creating more of them, right? You're creating more of them outside of just these two companies that really only do that.
Pretty much.
But at the same time, like you're not getting sort of the perennial character getting written over generations and everything like that. And I think that completely plays into the sustainability of the superhero.
Well, I mean, my thing is, I think it's interesting. Like, I don't think there'll ever be a time where Marvel especially, I don't think is, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. I don't know about DC. There was that blip for a day or two where people were like, what's going on with DC? Is DC going under? And people started to get very, there was a lot of angry, oh no, it's not going away kind of a thing. Does everyone remember when that rumor was like a month or two ago?
Right. I think it did move on to Marvel after that. So there were like Marvel's dying rumors sometime after that.
Right. But it became very much a moment of like, well, what happens if this is the thing that's going to happen in the industry? What, where is it going to go and how are things going to shake out? But I think it's, for me, when I talk about stuff outside of the big two, outside of Marvel and DC, I just wonder, I mean, I think now, if you could, if you were going to start, I don't think there's a better time to have a quote unquote, like by the trope superhero book come out from somewhere else. Because if you're looking for the thing that you're going to basically, now, because you said in the open about the idea that, you can't look anywhere without finding superhero stuff. I'm reminded of, I think it's Morrison was talking about being in New York and seeing Grant Morrison was in New York, seeing it was on a city street and looked over and saw a bus. And this is around the time that Justice League Unlimited was out. Right. And it was a bus with a big banner for Cartoon Network, and it had like all these characters. And he's like, "Oh my god, I never thought in my lifetime there'd be Dr. Fate on the side of a bus." Right? Not Superman, right. not Batman, not Wonder Woman, not Green Lantern. Dr. Fate. And again, you throw Dr. Fate into a conversation with people that know comics, it's not a big deal. But outside of that, nobody knows what that guy is.
Right.
Nobody has a clue. So it's one of those things where I think just that, like you said, it's a good time as a superhero fan to be, like there's so much, Tommy and I talk all the time about the fact that there's just too much stuff to try and take in because there's so much stuff coming out.
Yeah, I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches. I mean, I remember when I went to see the first Thor movie with my cousins and my brother, And we remembered the time when it was like, oh, they're talking about making an X-Men movie. That'll never happen, because no superhero movies got made unless you were Batman or Superman or a weird, offshoot
Spawn.
thing like Blade that kind of looked visually like those things.
Right.
And I remember sitting in the theater, I'm like, I can't believe I'm in the theater for a Thor movie. Like, how lucky are we? Like, how great of a time is this?
Sure.
Right. And now, there's been 3 Thor movies. They're talking about a 4th. He's been in what, 6, 7 movies to date?
Yeah. Which again, hard to believe.
So why do you think, though, that so many filmmakers are quick to poo-poo on the superhero, be like, it's a fad and it's going to go away, and almost seemingly like wishing that it goes away?
Yeah, to me, they're just old. and what I mean by that is their imagination is very complacent to what they're used to seeing. To me, I think it's just the tipping point. And what I mean by that is the one thing that people don't understand with comic books is it was dominated by white males. Representation means a lot. I remember when we were saying, Zach, influence and what a child might see and think they can become. That's probably the reason why the current Ms. Marvel is so great, or even Miles Morales.
We should say this was a conversation we didn't have on the show.
We
were just talking, back and forth, texting.
Yeah,
as people.
outside of what we generally talk about. But to me, I think it's just the tipping point as to which it can become, and take away that stifleness as to what they think a superhero should be. That's the appeal to X-Men. The diverse crowd and what we got to see. And that's just the start of it, in my opinion. We really haven't really seen that with superheroes, at least not in the cinematic form. It's just recently they're just pushing it. I mean, look, people are waiting to see Black Widow. I mean, outside of Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel, it's not that many female representations that come across that push a movie. So well,
there's still a lot of sexism about that executives out there still think that a female lead in an action movie nobody wants to see, and I think that that's crap.
Yeah,
sure.
I think if there's a good movie, people will go.
Yeah,
but I do think it's a little embarrassing that it took so long for a Wonder Woman movie to come out.
Yeah,
like I can't believe that it's only been 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah,
for being a hero that like my grandmother could name and can recognize.
Yep.
And that it has like become such an icon to pop culture for a major motion picture to only happen in 2017.
True.
Yeah, it's nuts to me.
We got Catwoman before Wonder Woman.
Yeah. Almost twice, because they were talking about spinning off Batman Returns.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. But what I was going to say was with Tommy was, when you talk about representation, one thing I like about the way Black Panther ends, and this is a spoiler if you haven't seen it, and if you haven't seen it, by all means see it, it's a good movie, is the fact that, like, we talked about this at the time, one thing I really liked about it was it's a playoff of the whole thing of the end of the first Iron Man, where he's like, are they going to do the whole secret identity trope, or are they not going to do the secret identity trope? And he ends up just being like, I'm Iron Man.
Right.
And then you have that bit with the kids on the playground looking to T'Challa, and they're like, who are you? And I think it's a projection of the idea of like, well, we don't really know as much about Black Panther even as we did about Iron Man, at least, again, as comic book fans, it's different, but the people outside. And I like the idea of the projection of, Black Panther could be something to aspire to, as opposed to Tony Stark being very self-centered and being like, I'm Iron Man. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's a very subtle way of setting the bar, if you would, for lack of a better term. I think it works really well for the ending of that movie. And otherwise, especially when you compare it to that first, I think it's a nice tentpole kind of between the two, endings of those two movies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never really read that scene that way, but that's true. Like to have that scene essentially be his introduction to the rest of the world, to the movie-going audience, rest of the world, to the rest of the public. Like what is this? What is this Black Panther thing that,
right? Like
you said, like if you're not in the comics, you don't know what he is.
No, not at all. You may have heard, you might know the political term more than you would the actual, know about T'Challa and Wakanda and all those characters there, but not nearly as much as you might Iron Man. Because I remember Iron Man at the time was a big gamble because, at Marvel he's not your Spider-Man or your Hulk. He was kind of a C-level character until, they made that movie with, Robert Downey. They really weren't sure about how well that was going to, land for them. So
because they had sold the rights to all of their A-list characters to other movie studios, and all they had left was the C-list.
Yeah,
right.
That was just left. That was what they had left.
And then they turned it into the A material.
Yep. Which is a nice stars aligning moment that they happen to only have the characters that happen to be Avengers.
Sure.
Left that they could do that.
But you got to remember at that time, X-Men from obviously from the early 80s till recently was the bread and butter at Marvel. They didn't really have, they lived off that franchise about the Claremont and Byrne stuff for decades. Avengers really hadn't been popular for a long time. So it was kind of yes, they were, I would never think of those characters as C-list characters, but the idea that, next to the X-Men.
Right, at that moment in time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, oh, sure. And think about how much it's reversed. You don't see the X-Men on anywhere, they're not on cups right now.
Right. Not as much as they used to, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when the MCU X-Men come in, we'll see it again.
Yeah, which I can't wait for, by the way.
When they come back.
So I don't quite know how it's going to shake out in the movies, right? But my feeling is that one of the things that can make that's sort of like a what's the word? What am I trying to say? One of the things that I think helps the superhero in film is the fact that you can kind of hang other genres on the superhero genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I think gives it some strength, right? That you can do a straight superhero movie, but you can also do a superhero movie like Winter Soldier that's kind of like, the 70s spy espionage movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can hang sci-fi on there like Guardians of the Galaxy and make it kind of Star Warsy, right? You can do a period piece like the Captain America first movie in World War II and Wonder Woman and things like that. And I think that you can have these cool hyphenated superhero dash something movie.
Right. Well, I'd even argue further the idea that say Ant-Man. Ant-Man to me, and I said this at the time and I still stick by it, was for me when you think back of mid 70s, early 80s Disney stuff, where Disney would try to do a superhero or type movie that was family oriented.
Condor Man.
Yes, like Condor Man. Thank you, Clifton. Something along those lines. You would have one of those movies that clearly fit into the family can watch. I mean, for the most part, I think Ant-Man is one of the most quote unquote Disney movies, and that's not a knock. I just think it's much more in that mold of, he's a fan. He's a criminal, but he's not really, he's not a hardcore criminal. We're not have to worry about Scott Lang killing people. He's not a murderer, but he's a small time crook. And he's got a kid, he's got an ex-wife, and it seemed to me kind of very much genre adjacent to a lot of stuff that Disney would do when they would do their, made for TV movies, I guess. It wasn't theater stuff, but maybe definitely something that was on the Wonderful World of Disney.
Well, but I like the fact that they went in the opposite direction too. Most recently with Deadpool. I mean, who would have thought that? I mean, a lot of people didn't think Deadpool would be sustainable as a horror comedy, basically, or even, a raunchy comedy, excuse me.
Right.
In which something of that nature could be sustained with superhero. I mean, heck, the first time we even got Deadpool was in X-Men Origins Wolverine, in which they scraped the character down to barely anything.
It's funny you say that because the other night, Zach had sent a text that Hulk Versus was on, and I was trying to think, is that the first time we get Deadpool out of comics? Is in that animated, where they all team up with where the Hulk fights Wolverine in one part, and then the other half is Hulk versus Thor. And I was trying to think, is that, we had them in video games and stuff, but was that the first?
I can't remember if it's the first anything we've gotten outside, because it may be a year after X-Men Origins.
Okay.
Is my feeling, which I do think that as dumb as his portrayal is in that movie,
right.
It did it was a shot in the arm for the character. I do remember that the character had a strong resurgence after that, but it's certain Hulk versus is certainly Deadpool's first animated foray.
Right. And I will say it's one of those things where in the comics, like, I mean, he's done, he's obviously in X-Force first with Cable and stuff, is where he first appears. And then you have like a Mark Waid miniseries where he's not really quite as the character we know now. And I think honestly, it's until like Joe Kelly does that book where Joe Kelly really like puts a stamp on him being, breaking the fourth wall and being
the Merc with the mouth.
Yeah, the Merc with the mouth being super, over the top, wacky stuff that goes on is really where you establish a lot of like, meat on the bones type of stuff for that character. We don't really have that before that book comes out.
Going back to the versatility of superheroes, I'm going to bring up, one of the famous filmmaker criticisms I think we mentioned before, and it's the Steven Spielberg one.
Okay.
Which Steven Spielberg says, quote, "We were around when the Western died, and there will be a time when the superhero movie goes the same way as the Western." He goes on to say, "It doesn't mean that there won't be another occasion where the Western comes back and the superhero movie someday returns." But what's interesting about this one is that he said those quotes while on a publicity tour for Bridge of Spies. Now, Bridge of Spies is a historical drama based on real-life spycraft, but the spy movie genre is a genre that came about in popularity in the 60s when there were tons and tons of spy movies cashing in on the success of James Bond and such. And it's also a genre that's never gone anywhere. No. There are 10 spy movies a year, every year since then.
Right.
And so, it's just a little funny to me that he latched on to the Western, saying that the Western died, but like there are examples of genres that just keep going and going, and spies are one of them. And I think the reason for that, similar to superheroes, is because you can put these spy stories in different things and have like real suspense thriller spy movies, historical spy movies, comedy spy movies, like the Spy Who Dumped Me a couple years ago.
Right.
Right. Spies Like Us.
Spies Like Us, yeah.
Yeah, what's the one with The Rock and Kevin Hart? Central Intelligence?
Yep. Yeah, that's
right.
it.
Yeah.
Like they're all spy movies, and we get dozens of them, like a dozen every year, because they haven't gone anywhere. And I do feel like superheroes could follow that mold more than they follow the Western mold, which like you do have the ability to make like a Western horror and stuff. I'm sure there's good ones out there, but like it's stuck in a specific time period more often than not. You have a modern Western sometime, but then you're still stuck with like what makes a Western, and then have to do it then. They just doesn't have as much liberty as like a spy movie does.
Right.
And I think superhero falls more into that line.
Sure. Granted, we don't get as many Westerns as we used to, but I mean, I'd argue that stuff like, again, you could just mess with the genre. I mean, Firefly or Serenity was a Western. It just happened to take place in space.
Space Cowboys.
Yeah, it was Space
I would say
Cowboys
The Mandalorian too, right now, which I'm watching currently. Yeah, it's
absolutely.
huge Western sensibilities in there.
Without the spaghetti Westerns, for sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But this episode was not recorded 5 months ago. He's just a little behind.
right.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think when when you're applying tropes to a genre, of storytelling, I think the idea that, especially like you said, the spy is a good one, the Western's another good one. I just think there are many things that you could do that don't necessarily have to take place. I mean, to me, it's the same thing as when they take Romeo and Juliet and try to put it in a modern setting, right? Like whether it's who did the Leonardo DiCaprio ones, do you remember?
Baz Luhrmann.
Baz Luhrmann is what I thought. Okay, so Baz Luhrmann did that, where it's a modern setting and it's not set in Verona of that time. But I mean, I think it's the same thing. That I think if you can play with time and setting and all that stuff, and still have the same tropes. And like you said, when we were talking about the Marvel stuff, I think they've done a really good job of trying to be like, well, maybe you don't like superheroes on Earth, maybe you like more of a space genre, or you like more of a
like a space opera.
Right, exactly. I mean, granted, that's one of the things where I was kind of excited about the idea of the way that Endgame ends with Thor, is the idea, and a little bit it's also in Ragnarok too, is the idea of like, when Kirby would take Thor into space. They would, around that time when they were early on, you would have Thor go do stuff on other planets where it's kind of like, why would you have, the idea of a Norse god out in space where they don't really have mythology going up against, Galactus or one of those kind of really big cosmic characters always intrigued me, because it was a weird mashup of genre and storytelling, and you got some really cool concepts out of it. And I think they're going to do more of that depending on where they go with Was it Love and Thunder? Is that what the next one's supposed to be?
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's got a great title graphic.
Yes,
it does. I can't wait.
So,
and I hope the rumors of Christian Bale being the bad guy are correct.
I hope so too.
Man, yeah, it's going to be one of the best performances ever in a Marvel movie.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope that's like the end result with the whole superhero genre. But what I love to see is the deep dive into a storyline in which it's a straight depiction of what we read. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the adaptations and how certain directors have a take on it, and trying to develop those stories into something that can translate to cinema. I said cinema. But I don't even think we've touched even the surface of certain great storylines that we have yet to see play out in cinema, as far as comic books are concerned. You know.
Well, because I think also there is a bit of the comic book movie that's reactive, right? And imitates a story that came already in the comic books. And I think that this is something that's a little bit more interesting about reading comics right now, is that it is kind of a period where they're IP farms now. They're trying stuff out for what's going to eventually be in a movie sometimes, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It just there's a little bit more freedom, I think, in the comic books of anytime one of these movies come out. I always have a conversation with somebody, a friend of mine or my wife, that's not as much into this stuff, to be like, wait, so who is this person? And then I am always like, okay, so what happens in the books is this person ultimately becomes blah blah blah. You know what I mean? And it is a little bit of like all the movies are kind of imitating the book. Like certain standout stories in the book a little bit, some more than others. Not saying the movies don't contribute, because they do. Sometimes, if something sticks in a movie, it will normally trickle down to the comic books, right?
Yeah.
Hence, I mean, there was a way you wrote Tony Stark before Robert Downey Jr., and then there was a way that you wrote Tony Stark after Robert Downey Jr., and it's not going back.
No.
It's not. It's not.
Nick Fury's the interesting one, where you had old Nick Fury, white guy Nick Fury, and then he became the Samuel L. Jackson type model in an alternate version of the comic book.
Right.
That has then went to the movies, became what everybody knows, and then became the version everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
Yep.
Yeah, no more David Hasselhoff, Nick Fury. That's all I remember that.
Unfortunately, no.
But like my other friends like wonder why I get so mad when things like get changed in Gotham and everything like that. And that's absolutely the reason, though, that I'm like, because if for whatever reason this thing gets popular and this sticks, like this take of the Joker sticks, that's going to trickle its way into the comic books. Like, how long was Bullseye drawn with that stupid scar on his forehead after the movie? Honestly,
True.
like,
yeah.
And that wasn't even a popular movie.
No, and it's I mean, very recently, I think, was he not drawn with that for the first time? Right. I want to say within maybe 3 years. That thing stuck around over a decade.
I think what a lot of times they would do is they would just finally put the mask back on him, so that you didn't have to see whether it was tattoo. Or wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. No, it's that thin line that when something is greatly appreciated, it tends to bleed into life imitates art type of situation, or art imitates life. But to me, as long as it pushes the story to greater heights, I can take certain back steps towards imagery, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, this is my question about like all the like Spielberg using the Western, like how many movie genres actually go away? I'm trying to think of like, other than the Western, I mean, maybe the musical.
Right.
Is the only other one that comes to mind. And Spielberg is currently making a musical, I will say.
Right.
No, I disagree.
Remaking a musical.
He's remaking a musical, yeah.
But no, The Greatest Showman, that was a musical. That just came out.
They were gone from like the end of the 60s until 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they started coming back a little bit around the late 90s to 2000.
Okay.
Moulin Rouge, Chicago.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And then there was that period where like every show had like a musical episode after Joss Whedon did it, and like and it didn't suck. because it sounded like a jump the shark moment, and you're like, oh, this is good.
To be fair, I don't know if you can give it to Joss. I think it's more Hey Tommy, who did Xena?
Oh, the guy that Raimi did.
Yeah, Raimi did it first.
Yeah, Raimi definitely did it first.
Oh, no kidding.
Because they have a musical episode there, don't they, Tommy?
Yeah, they definitely do. I'm trying to think of but there's a one storyline in which it preceded Joss Whedon's musical. He may have been influenced by that because
Sam Raimi and what was it, Bob Tapert?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Xena.
That's where I remember the first push to do like, hey, we're gonna do a musical. That was the very first I can recall where they did one like that.
Yeah. But going back to what Zach was saying as far as what genre that sort of tapered off, if I had to pin a particular one, I would say sports. It slowly started to come back because Ben Affleck has one where he's a coach, in which he comes back as far
drinking
as
coach.
Yeah, right.
Yes, the drinking.
Well,
coach.
yeah, that came out already, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but we don't have the we come up from
the feel good sports movies.
No Bad News Bear type sports in which you have it, or even our show.
We had Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, but
true.
Yeah, I mean,
remember the Titans.
I don't disagree with you, Tommy, but at the same 90s. Though, like, how many of those came out a year anyway? Right? I mean, and we still do get one every 2 or 3 years. There is one or so, and there was a period where like We Are Marshall and Remember the Titans and stuff like that. There was like everybody
Friday
had a
Night
coach
Lights.
movie.
Yeah, but Remember the Titans had what's his name from The Wire on it. That's how old Remember the Titans was. But it's now to the point we don't have the the small rough basically the Bad News Bears formula, which you have a team of misfits come together and win the championship. That's which is the Bad News Bear. I mean, excuse me, the Mighty Ducks.
Right.
The team that wasn't, or even Major League, the team that wasn't supposed to win wins everything.
Oh, I love Major League.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in forever.
Dodgeball.
Yeah, but
dodgeball.
There's
Dodgeball is
Creed.
even almost 10 years old.
There's Creed. There's Warrior.
Creed is more like, I give you Creed.
Right?
Yeah, I give you Creed. I forgot about Creed.
I'm not completely disagreeing with you, but it's also one of those things. Like I said, like I don't think that it was a genre that was made. It's not the spy movie. There's not 10 sports movies a year, but there is, one that trickles in every 2 or 3.
Right.
Always.
Yeah, but spy movies, we get 2 or 3 a year, I mean, it may not be of great notice. I mean, it may not be on the level of Mission Impossible, but we do get the smaller notes in which like Tinker Tailor spy, certain ones that trickle out in which they wanted to be bigger, but it still managed to come out. But sports movies, I would argue to say maybe one a year will get a sports genre. Like, we're not getting stuff like The Cutting Edge where it's like a rom-com sports, which they fall in love on the field or whatever you want to call it, or Tin Cup, or, it's we don't get to see the sports movie mashed up with a different genre. It's almost as if
that's true.
You barely get to see a sports movie.
Right. That's true. It doesn't mash up very well with other things.
Yeah. Like what's the Amy Schumer one? Now you have what can't think of the Amy Schumer what LeBron James is in it. Can't think of that
Trainwreck.
Yeah, Trainwreck.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
Yeah, but that was a sports movie, but you didn't really feel it was
That's not a sports movie. No, that's not a sports movie. That's a romantic comedy.
But it has sports theme in it because
it has sports in it, but it's not a sports movie.
Okay, no, I agree. I was reaching. I was trying to reach, but
it's not Miracle. It's not the Americans beating the Russians in hockey, right?
Yeah, but to me, I was just reaching with Trainwreck.
Yeah,
I couldn't think of anything.
I'm just saying though, like there's not many genres that went away, and I don't want to poo-poo Spielberg because I like his work a lot and everything, but it's like he picked the one that like Clifton said, doesn't have a ton of flexibility. Right? And even the Western kind of comes back here and there. And so I'm not really ready to say
lots of things become modern day Westerns.
Yeah. I don't know that Spielberg's wrong either, but my sense is that the superhero has a little bit more juice to it than the Western does.
I say he's wrong.
Sure.
I'll say he's wrong because I want to hear a new or a young director say that. You know, I mean, Scorsese and Spielberg saying that. Yeah, you get that. To me, I understand why people go for them for an opinion due to their track record and their awards. But recently, as far as what they've managed to make a hit recently, they're struggling on the current level.
And I mean, I understand that they're coming from a place where like these are the only movies that are doing well now. And so other movies tend to not be getting made. And I get that they're coming from that. But what's so heartbreaking about the Scorsese quote to me is there was a point where nobody took the gangster movie seriously either.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
And so I feel like that he's just kind of regurgitating stuff that was said about his early work, about something else.
I mean, that's what I was going to say, is that you could say the same thing about Spielberg. I mean, Spielberg for a while was like, oh, cool, summertime, there must be a Spielberg movie coming. Right? I mean, there was, there was some, the event movie belonged to somebody other than superheroes at one point. We did, we looked forward to whatever was coming out, as a tentpole movie for the year. And sometimes it happened to be Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
or it happened to be, what's another Spielberg movie that was huge?
Jurassic
Goonies.
Park.
Yeah, there you go. Either Goonies, yes, exactly. But yeah, Jurassic Park, or I mean, I can't really. I mean, I can't get behind the idea that you were once the guy that was known for spectacle, and now I mean, let's look at like the last. What was the last Spielberg movie? Was the big effing giant, whatever it was?
No,
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One.
Okay, Ready Player One. Again, I mean, it's a movie that trades off a bunch of nostalgia. Correct? Am I wrong?
It trades off of a bunch of stuff he did.
Okay.
Oh no, but
like, that's the
It's like
thing
a love
about
letter
it.
to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the madness of that movie is he didn't incorporate his own stuff into it. He used other genres. I wish he never did that movie. I wish he never did that movie.
I mean, again, it's one of those things where I look like, I still have not seen Joker, right? I'm not for any other reason other than it's coming on. It'll be on some cable thing, and I'll see it there. I didn't spend any money on it for whatever reason. I didn't get a chance to see it in the theater. I'll watch it when it comes to something at home. But for me, it was always funny to me, the idea that, Scorsese at one point was supposed to produce that movie. And then Cliff and you had a conversation after it first came out where I asked the question of how much, is it basically, and you were like, well, it's 45% Taxi Driver, 45% King of Comedy, and then 10% Joker stuff.
Right.
And I said, well, but I've seen all of that stuff. Like, I've seen King of Comedy years ago. I've seen Taxi Driver in a theater years ago. So it's one of those things where, and I've seen plenty of Joker stuff.
Which you should point out that both those movies are Scorsese movies, in case somebody doesn't know. Taxi Driver, most people probably know, but I don't think King's a comedy.
King's a comedy is what in that Bernie Mac and Cedric the Entertainer. So that's a little different.
So just the singular king.
Singular king of comedy is something else. But that one has De Niro and Jerry Lewis, and it's very much like, from when I saw the trailers for Joker, I'm like, well, this is clearly, it's a love letter to that time of cinema, as well as those two movies. It looks like, and when I read and delved deeper into the fact that at one point Scorsese was supposed to produce Joker, and I guess he backed away from it. It's, I don't know if you can have your cake and eat it too and say that, well, superhero movies are the problem, or they're not, I would have been fine with a quote if he said, hey, you know what? I'm not a big fan of the genre. It doesn't do a lot for me. I haven't liked comic books at all. So even when I was a kid, that would have been fine. But to say it's not cinema basically says, and then I think there was a lot of like pushback from like people like James Gunn and other that were like, you're basically saying that all these people that put all this hard work into making these films don't really care about them the way that you do about your movies. And I think that's incredibly unfair because, again, when you look at the source material and stuff like with Justice League, it's Gardner Fox and all that early stuff. Or, when you had Jerry Conway writing it in the 70s, or, DeMatteis and Giffen in the 80s. Or look, when you look at the Avengers stuff and it's like people like Jim Shooter or David McElhaney or Stan and Jack back in the day. When you look at the source material, you could push it away as kid stuff, but we all know that it's not just it's not just kid stuff, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that gets me too is because you brought up Indiana Jones, Frank, and stuff like that. And really, if we're splitting hairs, how different really is Indiana Jones from the traditional superhero? I mean, I know like like, we're not talking he's in a cape and all that stuff, but explain to me the brown leather jacket and the fedora, just as iconic as a cape around somebody's neck.
Sure.
As they fly through the air. And James Bond, who, like in GoldenEye, jumps off the dam as the plane is falling and free falls into the plane and manages to pull up before it crashes. I'm like, these are all superhero things already. Well, and I hate to be this guy, but I mean, really, if we want to go far back, explain to me how like King Arthur and Sherlock Holmes and Hercules. My God, Odysseus and Achilles,
Savage, the Spirit,
Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would argue even you could throw John McClane into being in the superhero realm of stuff, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, that guy manages to pull off stuff in every film that's not really. I mean, it's beyond normal human stuff,
right?
Well, to me, isn't basically the action hero the superhero? I mean, other than the costume, Batman, a man that can overcome great obstacles with his tenacity and spirit.
Pretty much. I mean,
and his intelligence, yeah.
And his intelligence.
Yeah, that's exactly my point, though. It's like, what's the difference? It's these kind of stories endure anyway. Like, we're into these stories. Like I bring up Achilles for a reason, because my God, like, how many thousands of years have people been talking about Achilles? Now, granted, Achilles doesn't have a movie every year, but they worshipped that character like a superhero.
Well, I mean, you can go all the way back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, right?
Yeah.
I mean, go back to Homer and go back to as far back to that stuff. That you would have those stories about Odysseus and travels and fighting Cyclops and not the Marvel character, but Cyclops's stuff,
right?
I mean, all that stuff. I mean, again, is that stuff again? When I bristle at when I hear them say it about themselves. When I hear like Marvel or whatever say, well, it's the modern myth. I'm like, I get it, but it becomes almost like a brand. It almost becomes like a brand or a self-congratulatory pat on the back. Or like if other people says it, I mean, I believe they're correct, but it's also one of those things where it's so overused at this point.
It is absolutely it depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm super into that kind of stuff, and other times I'm like, it sounds a little pretentious. But I'm not saying that Batman is going to be around thousands of years, but he was around for a long time before I was, and I would wager he's going to be around a long time after I'm gone.
Well, I was thinking about just different stories and stuff, and I always think about. When I think about the longevity of superheroes and the fact that, basically, you have Superman from 38 in Action Comics, and it's one of those things where, it's a never ending story. It's a never ending battle against, for, whether you like it or don't like it, it was Truth, Justice, American Way. And now it's, it's Truth and Justice. And, and I think about, and I don't know if everyone's read it. Has everyone read the Final Crisis stuff that Morrison did?
Yes, I read it at the time.
I don't think I read all of it.
I believe, I've read it as well.
Okay.
I mean, but which portion were you referencing of?
I'm talking about in the Superman Beyond stuff. You have Superman basically, the Superman of our books, of the books that we read, and then you have like all these archetypes that are kind of fanning out. Like you have Ultraman from like Earth 3, and you have, I think there's a Dr. Manhattan type, and then there's like, I think there's even like a Captain Marvel type, and they're doing all this stuff, and then basically the story ends with, there's a grave, right, and the grave, the tombstone of this grave, and I can't remember who the character is, but it's one of those things where. It's not our Superman, obviously, because he has to go on in the story. But one of them dies, and it's just the tombstone. What I liked about it was what Morrison had the character's epitaph was to be continued, right? Like the idea that death to a superhero character like Superman or whatever, it's just another story. It doesn't mean he's done. It doesn't mean death is like for us, where it's like death is, once death is here, it's over. I like the idea that for the superheroes, death is just another chapter. And again, we have the, when you talk about the trope of the revolving door of death, where, someone dies for a while at Marvel, someone dies for a while at DC, whether it be Barry Allen or Wolverine or whoever, most people don't really expect that character to be dead, quote unquote, forever. And I think that's how it is for superheroes. They may have a moment where, they're quote unquote, or they're done or they're dying or dead. But I always think there's going to be room for that story to be told again.
Yeah, but I hate that trope.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I understand. I'm just saying in the
we'll get into it. We'll get into it.
But
not today, but we'll get into
right,
it.
Right. But I just think I like that idea of it, the fact that, it's death, but, death is, we can overcome death. We've seen Superman do it. We've seen plenty of characters do it. And I think when you talk about the longevity of superheroes, I think the idea that, you can predict that they're going to be done tomorrow, but I mean, with Disney Plus and with the fact that, Marvel's got plans beyond, now that they've ended up things with Endgame, there's no, I mean, I don't see any potential in them stopping.
Right. And I mean, steering towards comics for a second too. I mean, what do we think Marvel and DC are going to do if they stop doing superheroes?
Right.
I mean, DC at one point had Vertigo at least, but like even that is kind of not a thing. I mean, like
right.
Neither company has really made strides at really doing anything else.
No, I mean, well, that was the thing. I remember, I think it was Clifton. I think you were the one that put it in our, like a group text or whatever, the idea, that article that AT&T was kind of like weighing their odds of what was it worth it to keep that division of Warner Brothers going? But it was not, I mean, basically the thrust of the article is like, it doesn't, like the profit that they turn back for the company isn't really their most productive of all the stuff that they acquired when AT&T acquired Warner Brothers. So, it's one of those things where I agree with you. What would they possibly do? I'd have no idea what they would do instead of what they've done for, 82 years at this point.
Yeah. I think even the comic books could be even more popular in some way, because the thing that gets me is like occasionally you see a movie or a TV show that tries to do a thing that has some kind of goal that it sets as far as a concept goes, right? Where we're going to do like a workplace comedy, but we want it to be with superheroes, right?
Right.
And inevitably, you can't always do that with a character that's known. So you create new characters and you kind of make them into these archetype things and everything. And like we said earlier, like I think that stuff sometimes can work, but a lot of times that can feel really cheap, And I'm really shocked that Marvel and DC doesn't do more with the flexibility of the tone in their own pieces, right? Like they could do romantic comedy comics more so, right? And do it with Spider-Man,
Right.
And people would maybe care about it, you know what I mean? And like in their attempts at doing this so makes it feel like it's just like this thing off in the left field, like when they did like the Mary Jane titles, like the young adult books and stuff like that and everything. I'm like, it feels a little like they're not truly committing to it,
Right.
Like again, like bringing back another quote from Brubaker, who he was talking about how he had wanted to do like a cop thing in Gotham for a long time, and Rucka did too, like independently of themselves, they both like this idea very much, and Powers hit and was doing really, really well. And they used that as a way to be like, see, like Powers is doing really well, this thing about cops. And we could do that with Batman, right? And people would care. And then he was like, Powers outsold Gotham Central, but
right.
But that's sort of like my point. Like, I feel like the Justice League International stuff that DeMatteis did and everything, that's kind of like, they're always saying like, we wrote that as kind of a workplace comedy and everything, like that's still talked about.
Sure. Absolutely. As it should be.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just think that there's flexibility to be expressed with some of the tone over here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's something we've talked about before, and we haven't talked about it in an episode, but we've talked about it personally, is the idea that, for a while there was this push of everything had to be, Batman 89, in tone and look. Like if you look at, like, say, for example, the John Wesley Shipp Flash from the early 90s, and how, everything is shot at night. There's not really any Flash during, like, the Flash doesn't run around in the day. And you're like, well, the Flash isn't Batman. I mean, they have a museum for him, for Christ's sake. It's not like, he's not hanging out in the shadows. It doesn't have to be a darker looking show. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's definitely not the books, but you can see definitely the influence of Tim Burton's Batman,
Sure.
The Batman 89 stuff. And for a while, it just seemed like everything had to be, cut from that cloth. Now you could argue that also it's because of, the grim and gritty take on stuff, quote unquote, from like, say, Watchmen on. But at the same time,
I think it's technology also. a little bit.
You think so?
I think it's also their way of hiding a little bit, maybe like a lower TV budget or special effects that haven't come a long way in TV that there is now. Like, you know, darkness is a little bit more forgiving with bad effects.
Sure. But I think you even get a little of that when you start, like when you come back with Batman Begins and stuff, or with Dark Knight, and then you have all the like CW stuff, and you have, you know, I mean, as much as I enjoyed Arrow and enjoyed Stephen Amell as Oliver Queen, it's one of those things where, you know, it's definitely a show that doesn't really get. I always felt like there was a lot of stuff that was just cribbed from Batman. Like they wanted to make a Batman show, but they couldn't. So they took the stuff that worked with Arrow, and then they took the stuff that they liked in Batman, and sort of crammed the two together.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, you know, because it's one of those things where, you know, Oliver Queen is pretty tortured in most of Arrow. Like I would say for like 98% of it, he's a pretty tortured character.
I think Oliver Queen has so much untapped potential as a property. I really, really do. And I agree with you. I think the real shame is that I mean, he fights Ra's in that show.
Yeah, he does.
For stuff that's, you know, all but literally pulled from the panels of Batman. And I think that's one of the things that makes Batwoman so refreshing to me, that it's nice to have to see them like flex those muscles and have it be with a Batman character instead of having it be like, well, it's kind of the only way we're going to get this made is if this thing kind of smells like Batman a little bit. And so I think that that's kind of cool. But I mean, I do think that they've gotten away from that a little bit. Like, you know, Flash is not very much a Batman show, I would say.
Well, no, not at all. Not at all. I think they learned their lesson from, I think the Arrow was their first pancake, and the first one's always kind of messed up. Like it doesn't quite, you know, when you're pouring the batter on the griddle, it's not quite right the first one you make, but the rest of them after that are pretty good. And I think that was the one where they cut their teeth and they learned what worked and what didn't work. And when they finally like said, we're not doing the, you know, Smallville, no tights, no capes, no tights, you know, no tights, no flights rule, and just embrace the idea of like, what's just superhero shows. And it shows the fact that, you know, just having Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then, you know, as Arrow is now gone, they have Stargirl and a Superman show waiting in the wings to be the next two shows that are on that network. So
I just can't get over your pancake metaphor, which I think is actually very beautiful. Right?
Thanks.
Like, yeah. I mean, the first one is always a little messed up. You're right.
Yeah, they did. They just, I mean, that you could, but it shows, especially even from like if you look at first season of Arrow to second season of Arrow, and I think it might be second seasons where they introduced Barry Allen as a backdoor, you know, they introduced him as a character and then backdoor pilot for the Flash. You know, it's one of those things where it's very apparent that, you know, first season they're treading that line of like, well, yeah, there might be people with powers, we don't really know, or whether way we want to do that. You know, do we want to keep it super grounded like Batman Begins? Or do we want to keep it, you know, do we want to lean? And finally, like I said, when they full bore lean into let's just do superheroes, it definitely changes tone and definitely changes the way the stories are told. So,
right.
Yeah, but I think people miss that idea that when new shows come out, you got to let it find its footing to develop and stuff. Because, I mean, I put that with Seinfeld. A lot of people don't care for the first season, but as it grew and it got its footing, it became the great show that it was.
Seinfeld took 3 seasons to get its footing.
Yeah.
I mean, now everything's got to be a hit right out the gate.
Yes.
Well, I just my only counter to that, Tommy, is the idea that you at that point you don't have, you know, we're talking, you know, you don't have all the stuff to draw from that would work for a show like that. I mean, Seinfeld was like, there's not like, you know, the Seinfeld Chronicles didn't exist from 1950 till now.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you know, there's a writer's room full of people that are developing Arrow, and they still decided, let's make it more like Batman. Let's not make him a free-willing millionaire that basically fights for the little guy, because that's what Green Arrow is.
Yeah.
You know, he's very much, you know, even if you go back to like the source material, you can go with the Neil Adams stuff, where he's the counterpoint to Hal's sort of conservative look. Hal, Ollie was the liberal. They don't even play with that. I don't think they even mentioned chili once. The fact that Oliver makes chili, like that's in the comics, I think it's never mentioned.
No, I think that's why I was hoping that Stargirl makes that mark, because I know what people think Stargirl might be is through that point of view the teenage superhero in a sense, but to me I think it's hopefully it'll be a gaze into the society, Justice Society, in which it's different than the Avengers, it's different than the Justice League, in what they incorporate and what they do. But I get what you're saying, because a lot of people felt that Green Arrow should be Batman-ish, but Green Arrow definitely isn't. No. And if you're a fan, I mean, of what the source material would have been, it could have been something so much greater,
Yeah. This is a perfect segue for us to wrap up on. So what's a character or a property that you think that you prefer, the movie or the TV or the cartoon? Like what's the comic book property that you prefer in other media over the comic book?
I mean, for me, it was one of those things where I was, like I said before, we were talking a little bit about it, and I said, I read some of those Joe Kelly comics with Deadpool, and I like Deadpool, but I don't like Deadpool anywhere near as much as I like Deadpool in the movies. Like, I think that I think a lot of it's got to do with Ryan Reynolds' performance. I think, like Deadpool, the first one, the second one I like, but the first one, if it's on, I'm going to probably stick with it for a couple scenes at least, because I think they got that movie right the first time. Like, I think that one they nailed. The second one, I like it, but I didn't like it when I first started in the theater. I like it more now. But I think that first one is just a phenomenal portrayal of a character that I really didn't think I wanted in anything else. But I like that character in the movie, in the first one, more than I weighed any more than possible than I do in the comics.
You mind if I go next?
Yeah,
go for it.
Blade. I could not give a damn about that character prior to Wesley Snipes' performance. I thought it was tired. I just saw him as a vampire hunter. I didn't see the nuance in the books. That first movie made me actually like, this character has potential. It could be very cool. I definitely prefer the first. I'm not talking about the other two much.
Are you excited for the Mahershala Ali?
I am not.
Really?
if he, I thought he's always the brooding, contemplating character. I've never seen that man as, not to say he's a great. Let me preface it. He's a great actor.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal actor, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I have yet to see him do an action sequence that I would enjoy or makes me want to go see him. Now, mind you, I would have said
he voices the Prowler in Spider-Verse.
Yeah, no, I recall, but again, that's animated. I mean, right. To put it this way, I would have said the same thing about Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man. So I've yet to see what they're going to produce with him as Blade.
I'm over this stuff though. These actors always take Muay Thai and lose weight and pack on muscle and everything. So
yes.
You know what I mean? Marvel's earned my trust at this point.
Tommy, what if he was playing Jefferson Twilight?
I'm in.
Yeah, I would so watch that in a moment. Yeah.
I'd rather see him as Mr. Terrific, but that's just me.
That would be cool too. Yeah, I would love to see that. That'd be great.
Yeah. Or even Jon Stewart.
He would be a good Jon Stewart too.
Yeah.
Clifton, you got one?
I mean, I can think of tons of individual characters that I think have been portrayed better in movies, or at least, but as far as movie properties, I enjoyed the Big Hero 6 movie.
Oh, yeah.
Several years back, quite a bit, and the comic is not that good. So, they took a broad idea from the Marvel comic book that most people didn't even know was a Marvel comic book, and made it a very enjoyable movie. I thought they made an interesting world, interesting characters, and some of the people who did write the comic for Marvel were involved in the movie, but it's a very different thing.
I have a very boring one because I'm just going to say the Timverse, Bruce Timm stuff, just because, I'm a DC guy because of Bruce Timm's animated work and other people, right. I should say, not just him, but, but he's the through line producer for all of these and everything. And I'm generally into comic book superheroes because of those shows. So I will say those. So, all right. So that's it for the sustainability of superheroes. We'll see. I'm betting on that they'll be around for a while, though. So, all right. So once again, I want to remind you guys to check out our website at letmeknowhowitis.com, where you can find all of our past episodes, as well as episodes notes that contain links and examples of some of the things that we talked about in each episode. You can also like us on Facebook at facebook.com/letmeknowhowit is and follow us on Twitter at our show's initials, LMKHII. And if you'd like to suggest a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a comment. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.